Hello again. IQ tests have gone out of fashion as a means of estimating the intelligence of individuals these days, but from time to time they appear under another guise, and when administered to varying ethnic groups, they shed light on the differences in intellectual ability associated with ethnicity. For the better part of 6 months in 2020, attempts were made by Freedom of Information requests to persuade Britain's Royal Air Force to disclose the ethnicity of those who did well in the aptitude tests taken by those applying for admission, and also to reveal which groups had not done quite so well. When in December that year the figures were finally released, it was very plain why there had been such a marked reluctance to let people see them. The tests themselves concerned things like spatial awareness, the ability to manipulate three-dimensional objects mentally, rotating them and working out where they would fit and so on. They had no connection at all with formal education, and they were not culturally biased. The scores in one, the BIS test of spatial ability, taken by those who might wish to be gunners, police officers and lorry drivers, were fairly typical. Over 5 years, from 2015 to 2020, they were as follows. These are the raw scores. Any Chinese background, 60.1. White British, 55.4. South Asian, 50.1. Mixed Black Caribbean and White, 51.4. Black Caribbean, 44. And Black African, 40.6. These scores align very closely with other tests, such as those for IQ, the Scholastic Aptitude test used in the United States for admissions to universities, and many others. Chinese people, as we would by now expect, came above everybody else. This will come as no surprise. Below the Chinese came white applicants, and a little way below them were those whose families were from the Indian subcontinent. Looking at the scores for black people, though, shows something stark, which is that the more black heritage a candidate had, the lower the score he achieved in the test. Candidates of mixed black Caribbean background, usually one black parent and one white, came higher than black Caribbeans, who usually have some white ancestry. The lowest scores of all by those whose background was entirely black African. It need hardly be said that the Royal Air Force, from whom these scores had to be prized as though from a closely shut-up oyster, was quick to respond with an orthodox explanation. A spokesman blamed underlying inequality in education. This is, however, hardly convincing. Had the different black groups all received a different quality or standard of education from each other? Did the young people of black African heritage go to schools inferior to those which the Caribbeans had attended? It must be borne in mind that all these groups had by and large grown up and been educated in Britain. Did the Chinese and white people all attend better schools? This argument would also have been more persuasive if the test had entailed a knowledge of mathematics, English grammar, or general knowledge. They did not. All they required was an ability to think clearly and logically. Any notion the tests could have been culturally biased in favour of Chinese and white people may also be abandoned. This might have been a reasonable point if one ethnic group consisted of illiterate Kalahari bushmen and the other of middle-class citizens from a sophisticated city like New York. But in this case, all came from the same country. Any rational person who has not been indoctrinated into contemporary ways of thought and examined the raw data from the RAF aptitude tests without the filter of modern ideology and correctness of outlook would most probably assume that the Chinese were the brightest and most able, and the black Africans the dullest in thinking skills. That most of us veer away from this simple view of the matter in favour of mysterious underlying inequalities in education, and indeed view the obvious answer to the conundrum as being disgusting and unacceptable, tells us a great deal about the mores of the modern Western world in the first decades of the 21st century, but nothing at all about why black people do not do well in objective tests of aptitude and intelligence. Thinking now about the Royal Air Force aptitude tests, we may say some things with assurance. All these applicants are likely to have attended the same kind of state school. It is unlikely in the extreme that any young person who had gone to a fee-paying school would have been applying for a technical position such as gunner or lorry driver. They would be almost certain to wish instead to become officers. These young people went to state schools and were all educated side by side in the same classrooms to the same national curriculum which is mandated by law in Britain. The tests, which were culture fair, appeared to show that the more African heritage an applicant had, the lower the score which he or she would achieve. The highest scores were achieved by those of Chinese ancestry. There can be little doubt that anybody viewing these results objectively, without their view being obscured by the modern horror and detestation of racism, would be very likely to assume that one could draw a provisional conclusion about the relative cognitive abilities of the ethnic groups involved. In every single case where such data may be examined, the same results crop up. Blaming racism, cultural differences, or societal inequalities really doesn't offer an adequate explanation for what is seen. When it comes to problem solving and abstract thought, Chinese people do better than those of black African heritage, and there is an end to the matter. The more white ancestry a black person has, the better he does in such tests of intellect, and conversely, the more black heritage, the worse. I am really not at all sure what more can be said on this subject. If it weren't for the fact that we are so terrified of being accused of racism, most of us would automatically assume that there were differences between intellectual ability between these various ethnic groups. I wonder what viewers think. Have I missed anything out? Is it possible that I'm being blind to some aspect of the matter which I haven't taken into account? I'd be interested to know what people think.